Welcome back to the channel. My name is Samuel Barlas, and here we talk about networking and cybersecurity. Now, first of all, I just want to let you guys know any opinions expressed in this video are my own and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of any past, future, or present employers. With that, we're going over CCNA by objective. We're going to hit objective 1.3 in this video. It might be a little bit long. There's a lot to cover here, and I want to make sure that I'm serving you guys well. So we'll talk about fiber, single mode, multi-mode. We'll talk about copper cabling as well. We'll talk about different connection types and topologies we can talk about in terms of networking. And then we'll talk about PoE a little bit and hopefully fill in some gaps. It can be a little confusing at some points because there's a lot of different terminology related to PoE. I'm going to go ahead and switch over to the full video mode here. You can see I've got some stuff written on PoE. That's because I forget these letters. So I just want to kind of give myself a reminder here. Well, let's first jump into cabling, and I know it says fiber first, but I want to jump into copper first. So I've got here some Cat6, and I want to show you this. There's actually an outer shielding on this, so this is shielded Cat6. This is not your standard Cat6. Cat6 doesn't by default have this shielding on the outside. It's almost like a tinfoil feel to it. It's just a light metal shielding. Now inside that, you can see, if the camera will focus, you can't really see, but you can see all these little tiny pins inside of here. These are all individually wrapped copper wires. Now, in this case, it's copper core, so we're talking, it is a solid copper wire. Now, it's also stranded, which is a little bit cheaper. Typically, we use stranded cabling for our patch cables and things that move a lot. Whereas things in walls, we want them to be a little more rugged, a little more sturdy. We want that copper core there. What you can't see inside of here is actually there's some twists in a little plastic piece that's inside of here that's keeping those cables twisted inside of here. So they're twisted together to help with the EMI between each other, and then they're also twisted in pairs inside the cable to also, again, help with EMI. So, that's something that electrical engineers have come up with, much smarter than me, that helps reduce the EMI, one, from the cable itself and from outside sources by being able to utilize those twists. Different colors of cables are twisted at different lengths, so if you go and you're making a cable or you are putting in cabling, you may notice that some are twisted very tightly together and other ones are twisted very loosely, so just keep that in mind. When we go to fiber, so I actually want to show you this. This is the shielding of a fiber cable. It's not super interesting. It's just kind of like a plastic little tube. But what's inside of it are all these little pieces of fiber glass. You can see they're color-coded. The glass itself is not colored, but the tubing on the outside. So if you have any idea how tiny these are, think of how tiny the core is that's actually glass inside of these, right? So it is all color-coded, so if you ever look at the back of a patch panel, especially on like a 144 count, there's tons of different colors of fiber. Now, jumping over to the actual patch cables, what we typically work with in a production environment, here's a single mode fiber patch cable, for example. So we can tell it's single mode by its yellow color. Now, fiber is color-coded, so unless there's like a really odd case, usually the colors are very, very consistent. So in this case, yellow is single mode. Now, single mode is pretty much single mode. I think there's two different kinds of single mode, but I don't think there's any differentiating factors when it comes to the performance. On this end, we have an LC connector. So it's relatively small, it's compact. This can usually go inside of an SFP. So your typical SFP, SFP plus connection. These are little rubber boots, and that's the actual glass in there. Now, one thing to know about single mode fiber is the lasers have to be a lot more focused. So single mode fiber goes further, but it has to be very specific. Whereas multi-mode fiber, the light is going to kind of bounce around the cable. It doesn't so much in single mode. Now, this end is not an LC connector. This is an SC, Sam Charlie. So these are a little bit bigger, a little bit easier for maybe a fiber technician to go and terminate this kind of connection, just because there's a little more wiggle room in there. You usually see these on some of the larger SFPs. So some of the older style SFPs, I don't remember what they were called, but some of those older style connectors and such. You may also see them on some of the bigger connectors. I think QSFP is a good example, if I'm remembering correctly here. So these are Sam Charlie, these are Larry Charlie, LC, and I'll put this down, go over to some multimode fiber. This multimode fiber is yellow, and you'll see that it has different connectors yet again. So these ones, they don't click into place. They actually, you push this and twist it. So you'll see that there's a little, if you can see here, you kind of slide in a little pin, and then you push it and hold it into place like that. And of course, there's the glass core there. Now this is orange, which tells me that it's OM1 type of multimode. So that is up to 1 gig of throughput. Okay. Now I've got this teal colored cable. Now this again is LC, Larry Charlie, to SC, Sam Charlie. And it's teal, which means it's going to be 10 gig multimode. And there's nothing really else to say here. I mean, I already showed you kind of what it looks like with the plastic insert off. Same concept here. We can get these cables in whatever kind we want. We want LC to LC. A lot of data centers, you'll see a lot of LC to LC. We can also remove this piece here, this plastic piece, and effectively switch which way if we need to make this a crossover cable, for example. Now, by default, these usually come as crossover cables. So what happens is if you have dark fiber in the ground and you do a crossover cable on both sides, you're effectively making it a straight through. So we need a crossover cable with fiber because Auto MDIX, the technology we rely on to automatically detect if we need to virtually cross over a copper cable, is not available on fiber. That's no option. So one of the tricks I used to use all the time in production is I'd pull out my cell phone and I would actually use that to look at the light. It's very important. Do not stare directly into the light. It can damage your eyes. The lasers in there can be extremely powerful, especially if we're talking about that single mode, that yellow fiber. So I would use my phone camera, and you have to light it up almost perfectly. Multi-mode's a little bit easier than single mode. I had a lot of trouble with single mode. Now another trick you can use is Fluke makes a tool, and I'm sure there's competitors out there that do as well. That's just the one I'm familiar with. Fluke makes a tool that you can effectively, put in front of this, and it'll beep if there is light detected. And so you may be looking, hey, you've got light coming from your SFP over here. You need light to come from the opposite side over here. So if it's coming from this one, you may need to just switch these connectors around. And again, you can tell with that kind of little wand or maybe the camera trick with your phone, but don't look into it. Some of the newer stuff out there, this is actually a green color. This is 100 gig fiber. And I just got this short for demonstration purposes, just because it was a little bit cheaper. But this is actually going to give us 100 gig multimode. I believe this is OM5. So we've got the orange, which is OM1. We've got the teal, which is OM3, which I think I forgot to mention when I had that. And then this is OM5. OM4 is in a pink color, and I think it's for 40 gig. So that's just kind of one of those things that is easily recognizable. Now, most of the time, when I was in production, we saw these three colors. Orange, 1 gig, OM1, teal, 10 gig, OM3, and yellow, which is single mode fiber, which can pretty much do any speed. The caveat with single mode fiber, and the reason that we don't use it everywhere, even though the cost of the fiber itself is not much more, is the cost of the optics. So because those optics have to be they have a very narrow range of how far they can be off, with single mode fiber, we're going to spend a considerably more amount on our optics. Now, it doesn't matter if you're only buying a couple, but when you start to scale, it can really become cumbersome. Now, one of the things I've noticed, people like ISPs, someone who has a lot of dark fiber themselves within their organization, they're typically going to try to standardize on single mode just because the cost is not worth the extra effort of keeping multi-mode and single mode fiber and cables and dealing with all that hassle, and being able to standardize it and save their technicians' time is actually more valuable than the cost of the optics. So it's really just a business decision. So that may vary a little bit based on your requirements here. So we talked about kind of the physical cabling here. We're going to get to PoE in just a moment, but I want to say that when it comes to PoE, you have to have copper in order for that to work. So you can't run PoE over fiber. Now they're trying to do something like that today, where they have a copper lead in addition to the fiber that is going to allow us to run power over the copper lead in the same cable. Now whether that catches on or not, I'm not really sure. I hope it does. I think it's a cool technology. I think it's going to make our lives a lot easier when we're talking about this new wireless technology such as Wi-Fi 6E, where the speeds can get crazy fast over wireless, and we're starting to run into issues with our copper cabling and the speeds it can provide. So next we're going to talk about connections and some different different topology kinds. So in our networks of the past, we have had shared media. So kind of like, maybe a coax TV today, we would have the shared media, and I'm going to write shared. Yeah. When we say media here, we don't mean like, we don't mean a television show, right? We don't mean a video. We mean a cable, right? Some sort of physical cable. So today's networks, we're not using coax anymore, excuse me. We used to use coax for computer networks. So, but the shared media type is something we actually use a lot today in television and coax networks today. So if you're running maybe cable television, you can utilize this shared media still because we're still broadcasting the same traffic over all of it, and this is the most cost-effective way to do that. Now with computer networks, we don't typically do that anymore because of the advancements we've made and the technology utilization that we do. So this would mean that our devices have to share one single trunk cable, essentially, and then we would tap in. We call these taps. This is a tap, right? And then we would connect our computers there. And this is, again, a technology of the past. We don't really do this in modern networks today. And that's because of things like collisions. So we talked about, or we will talk about, excuse me, the collisions and errors we have on switch ports and stuff like that. This was a big problem with shared media we don't have so much of today. So we have this. We also have what you'll typically see in today's networks is a star topology. Now I'm not going to draw it like a star, like most people will. They'll draw it kind of out and they'll have different things. I'm going to draw it more like this, just because this is typically how we see our networks today. And imagine those little boxes are computers or something. So today we have maybe a switch at the center of our star topology, and then we have all of our computers connected to that switch. That's going to give us a star topology. Now, technically, if you want to talk about, the network's expanding, right? We have more and more computers. This would be called an extended star topology. We do also kind of use that to refer to some things. Another one that we have is like a hub and spoke. So, you have a hub, you have spokes, right? So this is typically more of a WAN type design. And then you might have maybe a partial mesh or maybe a full mesh. This would go here. And I think that's it for a full mesh. You could have a partial or full mesh topology there with more of our WAN topologies. The other thing is point-to-point. So when we're talking about this star topology, this is a point-to-point network right here from the switch to the end device. Now on a WAN, right, this would be a point-to-point in terms of our WAN. That section, right? And we can add multiple point-to-point connections to create a mesh topology or a star topology, etc., etc. And now I want to talk about PoE, and I'm going to erase just a little bit of this. Again, with the power of technology, you can always rewind, you can always go back, so that little piece that I erased is not gone forever. So with PoE, again, we're using copper cabling. We use this to power stuff, right? So access points, wireless access points, VoIP phones, maybe IP cameras, etc., etc. IoT stuff, especially in the enterprise space. Not so much IoT stuff is PoE today. I'm super excited as I see more and more IoT stuff enabling PoE and allowing that to become a technology that's coming closer to the consumers, and as well as IoT coming into the enterprise space. So, we can power all these things, and really the benefit of PoE majoritively is we don't have to have the high labor cost of an electrician, right? So in the past, maybe we've had to have plugs ran to where we would have the wireless access points in the ceiling, etc. We would have to buy dedicated power supplies for all of our VoIP phones. That could get kind of expensive. Our IP cameras, right? We would have to have, again, electrical RAN. That can be very, very expensive and labor intensive. Well, now we can run this low voltage cabling, Cat5, Cat6, for a much cheaper cost than it would be to run, let's say, 110 or 220. Now, 802.3, so 802 is our Ethernet standard. That's going to be Ethernet. .3 is going to be our wired standard, right? So if you see 802.11, 802.11 is our Wi-Fi standard. You'll see 802.11 AC, AX, right? Those are different Wi-Fi standards. This is kind of the IEEE way of organizing their standard names. So 802 is Ethernet, 3 is wired, and then AF is going to be the PoE technology that we're using. So in this case, it's just PoE. AF is PoE. AT is what we call PoE plus. Now what we've done with PoE, right, is we've increased the voltage and the wattage that it can support. And then BT is what we call PoE plus plus. And this is really, at the moment, at least, is a pretty niche use case. So things like this have an enormous potential. But today we don't have a lot of devices that are leveraging BT today. I see a decent amount of devices with AT, but BT I think is really geared more towards running devices completely off of PoE, such as computers, lightweight computers, thin clients and stuff like that. I've seen some thin clients that run off of PoE++ with technologies like 802.3 BT. So we have these kind of common names that we use, just like in Wi-Fi, right? Instead of saying 802.11 AC, we'd say Wi-Fi 5, right? And so we have some commonalities there. And I think that's kind of enough for the concept of PoE. Really, again, the idea is we're able to have power wherever we need it. We don't have to pay skilled labor to give us that power, deliver that power in some of those remote locations where we would deploy something like wireless access point or an IP camera, or maybe an emergency phone on the wall. Right? That was something very popular when I was in the education space, having emergency phones available in hallways and classrooms, so that anyone could just pick up the phone and go, hey, something's going on. Maybe someone's having a medical emergency. Maybe hopefully there's no violence going on, but things do happen, and so being as prepared as we can is always a good thing. So that's all there is for section 1.3 of our CCNA by objective, and I will be looking for you next time as we go over some of the different cabling issues and TCP and UDP. Stay tuned. See you then.